The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store is a novel by James McBride and was published on August 8th, 2023. While McBride's story of Jewish, Black, and some Italian minorities collaborating to make a life together does have some stylistic advantages, the design of the plot lacks necessary cohesiveness to entice the reader to dig deep into the psychologies of the many, many characters on display. Let's start with the novel's advantages. Firstly, it was important to me in realizing that McBride is also a musician. I could afterward see a musicality in the scenes and summary, but especially the dialogue. There's a rhythmic experience to reading the novel, and it's easy to see when listening to Dominic Hoffman in the audiobook version, who gives the story the gravitas of an oral story told in the evening after dinner. When we say that dialogue feels natural, I'm sure it has something to do with this. McBride has a good ear for slang and idioms as well, embedding characters into a world seamlessly so as to allow the characters little friction in interacting outside of what the conflict provides. But to me, while this should have been in service of a more focused and narrow plot, the book unfortunately languishes in its own style so much that it actively impedes the novel's significance. Bizarrely, as I was reading, I could not help but think of R. Kelly's hip opera Trapped in the Closet. In that strange world, R. Kelly spends most of each episode spinning wheels, and it is only in the crescendo of the final segment that he reveals a new plot element, which provides some twist or interesting new direction for the story. The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store reads in exactly this way. For all the variety in the novel, each chapter has a very similar structure. We are introduced to a new character, or return to an old character meeting a new character. We get some backstory on how they got to be in this particular world McBride has created. And then, at the very end, we push the plot forward perhaps an inch. Imagine the novel to be like Game of Thrones, only instead of returning to old characters, we spend far more time investigating new ones, only for each character to take a single step towards the completion of the story. This introducing technique, as the path to world building, actively impedes the development of the plot. Even past 2/3 of the way through the novel, the reader is still being introduced to new characters. This has consequences. First and foremost, it robs the core characters time to investigate their lives alongside the reader, inviting more detail to themes of systemic racism and income inequality in the United States. This is a shame, because many of these core characters seem to be rendered rather well, with contrasts between them. Shona may be overtly heroic, and Doc Roberts has the whiff of a mustache-twirling villain, but in between these we have pragmatic characters who do what they can to get by, even if that means avoiding being the hero so as to live another day. The characters suffer at the expense of, supposedly, a setting or plot. Neither of these two other features get their time in the spotlight, however. The setting has too many spaces between for us to form a pattern, while the plot has too few. At the beginning of the novel, we are told that a dead body has been found in a well after being hidden for many years. By the end of the novel, we know who it is, but only after, at first, a very small amount of twists and turns, and later, by an incredible moment of happenstance, and the combination of the two gives the reader the sense that the plot was hand-waved away as not being the point at all. But when you use a dead body in the first chapter of your novel, you give the reader the sense that the dead body is important, that plot is important. Realizing it is not, when the novel ends, feels like robbery. In between these larger problems, there are smaller issues. The narrator will butt in on 2 explicit occasions to talk about cell phones and gun control, or lack thereof, in a context that absolutely does not feel earned. They come at highly climactic points in the novel, where emotions are high given the stakes, and therefore feel so ill-timed that the reader feels thrown out of the story, and instead thrown into dinner with their boomer parents. In the build-up to the culmination of the plot, because there are so many characters by the second half of the novel, everyone feels like they have to chime in on what plot development happened in the previous chapter. This takes an already threadbare plot and lemon squeezes it to soap opera or reality television levels. The amount of recycled elements is used so often, the novel could very well have been a short story. I should state, for the record, that I am all for a novel having little focus on plot, per se. I think what should replace this, however, is plot by other means, namely ideas, intrigue, characterization, psychological insight, very little of which Heaven and Earth Grocery Store manages to do. The novel feels like a massive pointillist painting that we are standing too close to, giving us the dots but not the image. Having inhaled a lot of Jane Austen lately, one can see that Austen manages to have a lot of characters, but still manages to give them dynamic movements, all of which bode well for the themes of her novels and the deftness of the marriage plot. Heaven and Earth grocery store sets the pieces, but is either unable or unwilling to move them together. It's like setting up a chessboard and then giving up after one or two moves. I think the themes of race, religion, and community suffer as well. When we spend a long time with smaller numbers of characters, we, in particular, get to see their holdings and expenses, money coming in and out. Great novels have dealt with the inability to get hold of money. While it is implied that there are poorer and richer parts of town, the fact is that beyond descriptions of the state of the world with adjectives about the cleanliness of things, what we lack are verbs. We spend an inordinate amount of time with a character named Dodo in a cell, learning how to communicate with Monkey Pants. Not only do I disagree with the optimism in this predicament that the narrator seems to place on such a horrific situation, I also think that these scenes come at an opportunity cost for the rest of the novel. Keep in mind that although Dodo gets out, there's no word on Monkey Pants. And in a way, Monkey Pants will never escape his own body. It is not only that Dodo and Monkey Pants are trapped in a cell, it is that many of the other characters seem trapped within the confines of the form of the novel itself. Many of the attempts made at optimistic resilience among these characters I disagree with. For characters like Shona, who spend their lives in charity to the local community, the tragedy is unbearable, which makes the contrasting optimism surrounding it feel like a lie. Eventually, we see terrible characters get what's coming to them, which is a small victory in the face of this overwhelming sadness. There is a moment when one character death has an attempt at empathy immediately before his demise, which I think everyone knows to be a narrative faux pas. Another character dies in so unlikely a scenario that it seems to be divine intervention on the part of the author. I think it's easy to see here that plot was not the point, but I think these resolutions make it clear that everything surrounding the plot suffers from these structural choices, most importantly, emotional resonance. That takes time and investment that the novel is unwilling to give. I think there is definitely something to learn from McBride about dialogue and the sentence-by-sentence movement. I am very impressed with his ability to recognize sound in words, but I think the plot and significance of the Heaven and Earth grocery store leave much to be desired. Thanks for listening.